All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to talk about how life in the United States changed when the United States entered World War II. Our aim question is, how did World War II impact the American home front? The home front is the non-military activities in the United States that contributed to helping the United States in World War II. So we're gonna, before we get started talking about that, some review from the last few days. I want you guys to answer this question, which is a review from our lesson on Monday. Was the United States neutral when World War II started? And then answer. I want you to look at this political cartoon over here on the right side. This watermark in the middle. It says Punch Limited Ltd. That has nothing to do with the cartoon. It's just that the cartoon was published by that magazine. Everything else in the cartoon is part of the cartoon, just not this watermark in the middle. And so I want you guys to analyze that, take a look at it, try to figure out what it's about, and then we'll talk about everything in about 1 or 2 minutes when you guys are done with this two-part do now. All right. The first thing we need to go over: was the United States neutral when World War II started? You'll recall that when World War II, even before World War II began, the United States wanted to stay out of those European affairs. They did not want to be involved in another global conflict. By and large, a lot of Americans were against participation in any sort of European war. However, when World War II started, the United States was largely not really neutral, especially by the time we got to 1941. As the war went on, as war was declared, as Nazi Germany began its expansion, Americans and the United States government became increasingly supportive of the United States supporting the Allied powers, the Allies in World War II. So in 1939, the United States authorized the sale of military goods to the Allies on a cash and carry basis. So Great Britain and China, for example, had to pay cash for any military goods they wanted and then pick them up from the United States themselves. But the United States became increasingly more involved as 1939 turned to 1940. Like in August of 1940, the United States basically gave Great Britain 50 destroyers so they could fight against the Nazis. And then after the presidential election of 1940, Roosevelt pretty firmly stated the American position in World War II in the Arsenal of Democracy speech, saying that Germany, Japan, and Italy were enemies of the United States and that the United States had to help the Allies, Great Britain and China, namely, and Greece. In 1941, those words came into action when the United States passed the Lend-Lease Act to provide a number of different types of supplies to the Allies fighting against Nazi Germany. And initially, that was, we typically think of the Allies being China and Great Britain, but by 1941, Nazi Germany had actually invaded the Soviet Union, so they were also on the Allied power side, and the United States started to send military supplies to the Soviet Union as well. In 1941, the United States took even more aggressive actions towards Japan and Germany and Italy. In 1941, the United States issued a trade embargo, so they wouldn't trade at all any sort of military supplies with Japan, which made Japan very weak in 1941. And also in that summer of 1941, the United States froze German, Italian, and Japanese assets, their money in American banks, so that Germany, Italy, and Japan couldn't spend that money on stuff they needed for the war. So even though the United States was neutral, they were proclaimed neutrality. They were neutral only because they hadn't sent troops over into Europe or Asia to fight in World War II. The United States was very much on the side of the Allied powers or the Allies as World War II progressed. In fact, in 1939, this cartoon was published as a demonstration that this cartoonist thought the United States was too involved, that the Franklin Delano Roosevelt's actions, especially with the cash and carry policy, was going to bring the United States into Europe's troubles. By 1941, though, 70% of Americans actually believed that the United States shouldn't be neutral anymore and needed to stop Nazi Germany. Which leads us to this cartoon, which presents that point of view. This cartoon was published in 1941. Some things you guys probably noticed in the cartoon: you have an eagle here that represents the United States. The eagle is the American bird, but it also has stars on it, which is a symbol of the United States. It is carrying a load of guns and other supplies, which is labeled a happy event. And these are all being sent to Europe from the United States over here to Europe over here via the Lend-Lease Act. And the cartoon is called The Way of a Stork. Of course, this eagle is not a stork, but a stork is something that brings something very good, like a baby, most of the time. So in this cartoonist is comparing the United States sending military goods to help fight Nazi Germany and Italy to delivering a baby. That it was something that was very happy and was very much needed to fight Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. Now, the United States officially entered the war by declaring war on Japan in early December of 1941. And when that happened, the United States really kicked into high gear to support the Allied powers' war effort and to defeat Nazi Germany and Japan especially. So our focus right now in this video is on the home front, how Americans in the United States helped the United States win the war effort. People who were not in the Army, how did they help the war effort? This Pennsylvania poster highlights a couple of different things that people did. They served on the Citizens Defense Corps or the Citizen Service Corps. They encouraged American patriotism, recycling or salvage programs, and also growing a victory garden. So we're going to talk about a few of those things. So number one, the American economy shifted entirely into producing war goods. Like the United States needed stuff to fight. That includes, as you can see here, guns, ships, planes, bombs, military uniforms, medical supplies, bullets, all produced instead of consumer goods. In fact, you cannot purchase a Ford or Chrysler automobile from 1941 because they weren't being produced by Ford or Chrysler. Instead of automobiles, they were producing tanks and jeeps for the United States Army to use. In fact, only 139 cars were produced at all in 1939. And the United States government created a couple of different agencies to make sure that the economy was producing all the things that Americans needed, including the War Labor Board and the War Industries Board. So the War Labor Board was created to make sure that there was no work stoppages. Typically, the War Labor Board sided with labor unions, awarding them higher wages when they threatened to go on strike, which was really good for labor unions and American workers. And the War Industries Board made sure that any sort of raw material or natural resource was being used for the war effort. This also went to, the first recycling programs, I think, can be traced back to World War II. People were actually encouraged to save their bacon fat and bring it to meat dealers so that that bacon fat could be turned into explosives. Any sort of leftover tin can that you could have had, anything, we've got Uncle Sam here saying toothpaste and shaving cream tubes were brought to the United States, were brought to tin salvage stations to be turned into weapons. Of course, paying for all of this stuff was expensive. The United States did it through two ways. The sale of war bonds. You guys know all about war bonds from World War I. Americans went to the post office or any location where you could purchase a war bond. They bought a bond, and when they did that, they were loaning the American government money to buy stuff for the war. But the war was more expensive than World War I, and it required the United States to also pass a law to deduct taxes from paychecks to finance the war. The United States government also, you guys know rationing from World War I. It's when you limit the amount of a product or good that you can purchase. During World War II, rationing became mandatory. The federal government made people ration products. Like you could only purchase 2 pairs of shoes in a year, for example, because shoes were rationed. Food was rationed, and they were rationed through these things called ration books. So volunteers distributed these ration books to Americans. You could pick them up at a number of different locations, and basically the ration books were stamps. And anytime you went to a store and you wanted to buy something, you had to give a stamp. This is Cecil Andrews's War Ration Book for War Ration Book 4, and you had to give a stamp to buy something. And if you ran out of stamps, then you couldn't buy any more products or goods. And each stamp was worth a point. And if you wanted to buy like meat, it was worth, I don't know, it was worth a lot of points. But if you wanted to buy something like eggs or flour, it was worth less points. And it was a way to get Americans to conserve how much food they were eating, so that there was more food available to soldiers overseas. What am I doing? All right. So that's rationing. And a whole bunch of things were rationed. Like women could only purchase like 2 or 3 pairs of nylon pantyhose a week, which was something that was very much in style during World War II. You can watch a video in your textbook webpage about how a number of the other different items that were rationed. As with World War I, Americans were encouraged to grow victory gardens, which were just home gardens so that Americans could grow their own food. It was a patriotic act for people to engage in. It raised morale at home a lot of the time, but it also made it so that if you were growing your own food, you needed less food at the grocery store, which meant more food for the Allies in World War II. I think there's more. There should be more. Apparently not. Well, that's it for this portion of our lesson. What I want you guys to do on your note page for today is to answer these questions based on the video we just watched. You don't have to look at the documents here. You can look at the ration books if you'd like. You don't have to. And then I want you guys to highlight a couple other pieces of information about how the American home front changed during World War II. I want you guys to open up this crash course video. I want you to watch the first 4 minutes and 30 seconds of John Green telling you a little bit about the United States economy and how it changed during World War II, so you can answer these questions up to number 10. And that's it for today. On Monday, we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the social changes that happened in the United States because of World War II. And then we'll move on to how the war was fought. Other than that, I hope you guys all have a great weekend. Of course, if you have any questions or concerns, send me an email. I'll be glad to help you out. And that's where we're at. Have a great day.